Good morning. Today's lecture is Illinois, an American Frontier to an American State, Part 1. Illinois and the American Revolution. When the American Revolution broke out, Illinois was a distant British colonial territory. However, there was one major campaign in Illinois which helped keep Illinois country in the hands of the Americans. Rogers Clark and the American Bottom, or that lower section of what is today Illinois. So I have an image of Mr. Clark. So Clark was a Virginian who made several expeditions down the Ohio River and who owned land in nearby present-day Louisville, Kentucky. He wanted the British to be driven out of North America entirely so that the interior could be developed by Americans. His ultimate goal was to take Detroit, the most important British fort in the West. However, he first wanted to secure the Illinois country. If the forts there could be taken, he believed that he could then forge links all the way back to the East Coast. The forts in the far west could then be supplied for future attacks north against the British. Another reason that Clark was interested in the Illinois country was because Virginia claimed it. The Virginia Colonial Charter of 1606 gave Virginia land to the west that would be today's southern portion of Illinois. And this map shows you some of these land claims of the colonies and then eventually the early states of the new nation. This one doesn't show where Virginia claimed parts of what is today Illinois, but it did claim that southern portion. But other states obviously claimed it as well. Here, the example is New York. So Clark consulted Virginia's Governor Patrick Henry, and through the use of spies, he was able to let Henry know that the region only had a few British soldiers present and that the French had little loyalty to Great Britain. He told Henry of his plan. He wanted to smuggle about 200 to 300 troops into the Illinois country. He planned to take Kaskaskia by surprise and then move quickly on to Cahokia before the British station at Detroit had time to react. Next, he would march on Vincennes, a village on the east bank of the Wabash River. This is a map that gives you uh, uh, details of Roger Clark's campaigns and then also the southern portion of Illinois. So Clark received approval for his campaign, but he was given very little financial help. He eventually recruited 175 men for the campaign. Clark and his men traveled down the Ohio River as far as Fort Massac. They hid their boats and then made their overland trek more than 120 miles to Kaskaskia. They arrived in Kaskaskia on the night of July 3rd, 1778, and the official in charge was captured while he slept. On Clark's orders, the soldiers created a lot of noise to convince the townspeople they had a very large force occupying the town, and he was hoping that they would give up without a fight, and they did. The next morning, he explained to them his intentions. He told them that the British colonies to the east were rebelling against the British crown and they were seeking their independence. Clark promised that if they became Americans, they would receive the same privileges and protections all other Americans would have as soon as the British were defeated. He ended his speech with an important piece of news that had not reached the far west, that France had agreed to help the Americans attain their independence from Great Britain. Clark sent his most trusted officer, Captain Joseph Bowman, to the French villages north of Kaskaskia. Some of the villagers volunteered to accompany Bowman to help explain the situation. Within 3 days, Clark had control of all the settlements, Illinois settlements, and no blood had been shed. Clark next turned his attention to the British fort at Vincennes. He wanted to capture it to protect the supply lines between Kentucky and the Illinois country. Clark consulted Father Pierre Thibault, the priest serving the French settlements in the region. He told him that the French would react as the French did in other interior villages. And this was true. The French at Vincennes agreed to American rule and welcomed Clark's army. The British at the fort surrendered. Again, no bloodshed. And I'll put that map again so you can see where Vincennes is. In the meantime, Lieutenant Henry Hamilton, the officer in charge at Fort Detroit, learned of what was happening down in Illinois. He headed south with a small army. Clark got word that Hamilton was on the march. He didn't know where he was headed. Clark was in Kaskaskia when the main part of his army received word that Vincennes had fallen to Hamilton. News of Hamilton's success made it all the way to Kaskaskia, and the Kaskaskians grew very nervous about this, figuring that the British would be on their way soon at their village. In an effort to calm the villagers down, Clark lied to them about reinforcements on the way from Kentucky. Clark had a friend in Vincennes who would be of good help for him. This was Francois Bigot, a Sardinian merchant from St. Louis, who was in the village when it fell to the British. He was initially arrested but released when he promised to head straight back to Illinois. back to St. Louis. On his way to do so, he stopped at Kaskaskia to inform Clark of what Hamilton was up to. So Hamilton sent word to the tribes, Indian tribes in the north, in and around Michigan especially, that there was going to be a large fight in the spring, and he wanted them to join him. He promised that together they would wipe out all the American frontier settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. They were to spend the winter making small raids on American settlements, then return to Vincennes in the spring for a great battle. Vigo told Clark that at present only a small British force was actually at the fort. Clark believed that Hamilton would never suspect a winter assault. And this is an image of that winter assault. So on February 5th, 1777, Clark and his men set out on a long march east across Illinois from Kaskaskia to Vincennes. It was a cold, wet, muddy march through wetlands and floodplains, and when they got close to their enemy, Clark forbade them to make any fires. On February 23rd, Clark and his army finally made it to the fort. With the fall of the fort in the offing, the men were quite rejuvenated. So Clark ordered his sharpshooters to take any British soldiers on the fort, fire any of the British soldiers that were on the fort walls and in their gunboards. Hamilton's losses began to mount. He didn't exactly know how large a force this was that he was confronted with, and so he decided that within a few days it was time to surrender, and the Americans suffered no casualties. Clark's final victory at Fort Vincennes made the Illinois country an American territory.